Fun loss for the Kings in Sacramento tonight, but is interim head coach Alvin Gentry wasting the team's time? I'll explain on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Check out prizepicks.com, use promo code NBA, or go to your app store and download the app today. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member for the last 7 years. This is my 8th season covering Kings basketball now with ABC 10 TV here in Sacramento. And before we dive into this Kings loss at home to the Denver Nuggets, really that's going to be the last thing that we talk about on today's Locked On Kings podcast. There's two major topics that we're going to hit on. The first being what I teased there in the intro, that I think Alvin Gentry, interim head coach Alvin Gentry, even though I understand what he's coaching for, I don't think he's doing the Kings organization justice right now, so much so that maybe Monty McNair, Kings general manager, might want to consider stepping in. I'll explain that in a second. Also, we have to talk about Domantas Sabonis' suspension for one game. Did not play tonight against the Denver Nuggets, and the NBA's explanation and hypocrisy for that. Plus, the Kings made a statement against the NBA's ruling or the NBA's suspension of Sabonis. And then we'll talk about the game itself. But let's dive into a conversation that sounds a lot more harsh than it is. And I admit that you read a title and you think, what is Matt suggesting that interim head coach Alvin Gentry is sabotaging the team in some way, or that he's harming the team? I don't mean it in a way to be super critical of Alvin Gentry by any means, because first and foremost, we have to establish this. I understand what Gentry is coaching for. I understand what Gentry is trying to do. As long as the Sacramento Kings have a chance of making the play-in, Alvin Gentry recognizes that that is his one and only chance of having or of being able to retain this job. Gentry takes over for Luke Walton when he was fired earlier on this season, is given the interim title, even though he just wanted the straight up head coach title, is technically under contract next year for the Kings, as he and when he was brought in to be the lead assistant for Luke Walton, he and Walton were put on the same contract length. Gentry wants to coach this Kings team going forward. Why wouldn't he? It's one of 30 NBA jobs. And while Gentry is very well respected here in Sacramento, very well respected around the NBA, I think it's been made more and more clear, even if some of it's not his fault, that he is not the guy for the Kings going forward. He is not going to be the Kings head coach and has little more than a courtesy chance. And what I mean by that is the Kings will probably give him an interview in their offseason coaching search process just to reward him for being here and coaching the Kings through a tough situation. But his chances, I would say, of actually becoming the Kings head coach full-time is in the single percentage points. And that is heavily reliant, truthfully, on the Kings having so much success right now, surprising everybody to where you don't want to risk breaking that up. Like if Gentry somehow coached the Kings to go on an undefeated run for the remainder of this season to where they made the play, and then through making the play and made the playoffs, and then in the opening round of the playoffs, either won a series or put up a really, really good fight, maybe then Gentry has a good chance of retaining his job. And of course, that's a lot of what ifs, but that's what Gentry is coaching for. And I don't blame him for that. However, what Gentry's interests are, his own personal interests in his job, and what the Kings' interests are for this team going forward are significantly different. And while I've said time and time again recently here on Locked On Kings that I believe it would be beneficial for the Kings to win games, to figure out how to put 2 and 2 together with these different Kings players that we believe are going to be a part of the team long-term. And when I say long-term, I mean beyond this season, really going into next season where the expectations are so high. There's a disconnect there with Gentry and with what the Sacramento Kings are trying to do. And a perfect example of that is the starting lineup that the Sacramento Kings have been rolling out there. Look, I understand I mean, maybe I don't understand why Trey Lyles is starting at the 4 spot. Maybe because the Kings have a significant lack of depth at that 4 spot, that Lyles is one of your only options. And to be fair, Lyles has been playing decently well and had a pretty good first half, at least, against the Denver Nuggets tonight. But is there anybody that looks at Trey Lyles and says, oh yeah, he's got a future here in Sacramento, and on top of that, an important future, that he's going to be a potential impact player for the Sacramento Kings next season for a potential playoff push or a hopeful playoff push? No, nobody looks at Trey Lyles like that. Nobody expects Trey Lyles to be that guy. And that's no disrespect to Trey Lyles. There are just other players on this roster right now who Lyles is starting over, who are far more likely to be those impact players that the Kings need them and want them to be next season. The two biggest names that jump to mind, even though they don't play Lyles' position, you adjust your lineup, maybe play small in order to get these guys in the game. I'm talking about Davion Mitchell and or Dante DiVincenzo. Either of those guys, far more likely to be a long-term effective piece for the Sacramento Kings than Trey Lyles, and even Justin Holiday to some extent. Now, Justin Holiday is under contract next season. I expect him to return for the Sacramento Kings next season. And tonight's game against the Denver Nuggets, especially defensively, he showed what an asset he can be. And I'm a fan of Justin Holiday. I personally hope that he is a King next season. But I recognize that if Justin Holiday is your starting 2 next season, you're probably not that much better of a team. Meanwhile, Davion Mitchell and Dante DiVincenzo, while I don't expect them to have such a massive impact that it blows Justin Holiday's potential in the starting lineup out of the roster, or out of the water rather, I expect either of those 2 guys to potentially matter more to Kings' success, especially if I'm picking out of the 2, Davion Mitchell. But there's no reason to me, especially in a game where you're missing Domantas Sabonis. Look, the Kings' chances of winning are low with Domantas Sabonis, especially against a team like the Denver Nuggets. But without Sabonis, when he's not playing because of a suspension, what reason do you have to not try and get a look at something different? Especially when that's something different. It's not just a random throwing something out there and see if it sticks. It's, okay, here are guys that we expect from the Kings' perspective, not necessarily Gentry's perspective, but from the Kings' perspective, we expect these guys to be a part of our future. So we want to see what they can do. We want to utilize the remainder of this season, even if our chances of the playoffs are slim to none. We want to utilize the remainder of the season to get a good look at these guys and see if one of those 2, at least, can be our starting 2 guard going forward. And you can get both of those 2 in the game at the same time. Move Harrison Barnes down to the 4, have DiVincenzo play the 3, Davion Mitchell play the 2, Fox playing the 1, Sabonis or whoever is available if Sabonis is suspended, like Damian Jones starting at the 5. There you go. It's a small lineup against a Denver Nuggets team that has the reigning MVP and a big man in Nikola Jokic. Maybe it's not the most effective thing on the planet. I'm not really worried about that. I want to see how those guys look in the starting lineup. And I believe that by Gentry choosing to play Lyles because he's more of a better fit at the 4 spot, choose Justin Holiday because he has a little more experience, you're wasting valuable time that the Kings can use this season for the remainder of this season. Because as much as the games might feel meaningful for fans, and look, I readily admit that coming into this game against the Denver Nuggets, when I found out Domantas Sabonis wasn't playing, I found very little reason to watch this game. Now, of course, I still did. I have to. But my excitement towards this game was really taken out. The wind out of my sails, really, because I'm watching Kings basketball for the remainder of the season, mostly to watch the pairing of De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis and what that means for the future. When half of that is missing, I get De'Aaron Fox can still play well, and he absolutely did. But my interest is in the 2 of them and what they can do together. The Kings, I think, can make sure that the remainder of the season, each and every single game, can be useful to some extent for this offseason and for next season. And I think Monte McNair and multiple members of the front office need to recognize, if they don't already, that that's probably what's best for this team at this point in time. And I know there's, like I said, a ton of respect for Alvin Gentry. He's been around the league a long time. And Monte McNair is not trying to go in to Gentry's office and basically tell him, look, we're not bringing you back and now you're going to do things our way, and strong arm him and piss him off. And maybe this scenario that I'm bringing up would piss Gentry off and would be disrespectful. But I think it might be valuable for at least a conversation to be had between McNair and Gentry. Hey, Alvin, if nothing else, can we get our guy Davion in the starting lineup next to Fox and get those guys playing a lot of minutes together from the opening tip? Can we just get that for the remainder of the season and see what we have? You understand the situation you're in. You understand the likelihood of of you getting this job going forward and us bringing you back. We also understand that you need this team to win to boost your chances. But this is what's important for our organization going forward. Like, I think that conversation needs to be had. And I think the Kings could be doing a better job of utilizing this time. Now, Mitchell still got to play decent minutes and was in the game at the end when it was close. Dante DiVincenzo played a handful of minutes as well. I'm looking at starting lineup. I'm looking at opening tip. I'm looking at really specifically Fox and Mitchell playing a majority of their minutes on the floor together. That's what I'm looking at. And I'm not seeing that from Alvin Gentry at this point in time. So I think it is fair to say, even though it sounds a lot more hostile or a lot sharper or more barbed than it's intended, I do believe that Alvin Gentry, because he's coaching for his job, and by choosing more win now moves, even though that's debatable, I think he's wasting the Kings' time at this point, wasting the valuable time that the Kings have for the remainder of this season. Do you agree? Am I being too harsh? Am I missing the point? Let me know at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Domantas Sabonis was suspended. The NBA, they look like hypocrites for suspending him. I'll explain why after I tell you about our title sponsor here of the Locked On Kings podcast today. I'm talking about Prize Picks. NBA fans, you're looking for daily fantasy options for the NBA, right? And in comparing NBA fantasy to like MLB or NFL fantasy, it's just not on the same tier until Prize Picks came around. The award-winning app Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love this app. It's the only way that I play fantasy basketball, and I think you will too. It's very easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, so you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks offers safe and fast withdrawals, so you don't have to worry about your money and the validity of that, and you can use their award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play right now. The way it works, you can pick any prop that you can think of, from like points scored to rebounds and steals. Say it's for De'Aaron Fox, and let's say his over under for points projections was 25.5 tonight. If you took over, then you made some money, and you do that for multiple different projections for multiple different players at the same time. And they don't just offer NBA; they have options for college basketball, college football, NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, and so much more. For a limited time, Prize Picks is an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all Locked On Kings listeners. Get $50 for free if your player of your first Prize Pick entry, or any player of your first Prize Pick entry, scores a single point. That's it. It's that easy. It's $50 for free, but you have to use promo code NBA to cash in on that deal. Again, that's promo code NBA for basically $50 free, and enjoy fantasy basketball the right way with Prize Picks. When we saw the news that Domantas Sabonis was suspended and would not play tonight against the Denver Nuggets, I was not surprised. My initial reaction was not surprised at all, because even if I, seeing the video, didn't see that much, it wasn't Sabonis's contact in my mind watching the video. It wasn't egregious. It wasn't overly hostile. He was clearly hot. He was clearly frustrated, and they bumped each other. But anytime contact is made between a player and official, especially after a technical foul, it's more than likely going to result in a suspension. And I think by the letter of the law, it really is supposed to result in a suspension. Or at least that was my expectation at the time. People on Twitter and I mean, James Ham talked about this. Sean Cunningham talked about this. A lot of people pointed out very, very quickly the hypocrisy of the NBA because of a couple recent incidents this season with two, not necessarily bigger name play. Well, one of them definitely bigger name players, but two players for maybe bigger markets or more significant teams that didn't get suspended, that were more egregious than what Domantas Sabonis did. I'll explain that. But first, I want to share with you the terminology used by the NBA in their statement as to why they suspended Domantas Sabonis. And really only two parts are important here. Basically, the NBA used the words aggressively confronting. So Domantas Sabonis was aggressively confronting the official, which was good for the first technical foul. And the second technical foul in the ejection came from Sabonis approaching and making contact with the official in a, quote, hostile manner. Those were the terms used. And again, my interpretation of the rule is any contact is going to be a suspension and a fine to boot. So I wasn't surprised. But when I read this terminology and pair it with the other incidents that didn't result in suspensions, I can't help but roll my eyes. Like, if you go back and watch that video, contact is absolutely made. Sabonis is in the wrong for that alone. But to say that he's aggressively confronting and approaching the official in a hostile manner, as if he was approaching the official to intentionally make contact that would push, shove, injure the official, intimidate the official in any way, that's not the case at all. And saying hostile manner is just way too broad for my liking of that interpretation. But again, not surprised because contact was made. But it was pointed out to me and many others that there was one incident in particular that happened with the New York Knicks. Julius Randle got into a little spat with the Phoenix Suns' Cameron Payne, I believe it was. And in this situation, it's different from Domantas Sabonis because Sabonis was directly interacting with the official, whereas Randle was trying to get past an official to Payne in this incident between two players, not necessarily a player and an official. But however, he clearly grabs and shoves the official to the side, which again, that's contact with official, significantly more hostile and aggressive than what Sabonis did. And Randle was fined, but he was not suspended. And then there was another incident earlier on in the season with Chris Paul, of course, legendary point guard with the Phoenix Suns, making contact with the official. No suspension there. So this is revealing the hypocrisy of the league here. You're talking about, okay, we're going to issue the suspension to a first-time offender. That's an important note too. Domantas Sabonis is a first-time offender. He's never been issued or ejected from a game at any point in the 6 seasons that he's been in the NBA. This is his first time he's ever been ejected. And yet he is issued a suspension for something that is less significant than weeks before a player who plays for a major market New York Knicks team who doesn't get suspended for blatantly shoving an official, or a superstar in Chris Paul, and we know players and superstars and are allowed to get away with jawing a little bit more, complaining a little bit more, depending upon your status. But look, when we're talking about suspensions for physical contact, you can't blur the lines and allow some guys to make physical contact in one areas and then punish another for making physical contact in a way that was significantly less egregious just because of the team that he's playing for and that specific incident. Like, I agree that you have to look at each incident and there can't be like an overarching punishment or an overarching condemnation or decision that is made regardless of the situation. You have to take each situation for what it is and decide punishments or fines and suspensions accordingly. But to take the Sabonis thing and suggest that that was more significant, so much so that that deserved a suspension compared to those other two incidents that I listed off, which I tweeted out the Julius Randle incident, and I think it's from Sean Cunningham. He's in that thread is also the Chris Paul suspension. So you can go to my Twitter at Matt George Sack and you can see that. It's hypocritical by the NBA and it's not necessary. And unfortunately, it cost us an opportunity to see Domantas Sabonis tonight in a very winnable game. Now, knowing the Sacramento Kings, if Sabonis would have played, maybe the Kings would have done what they did the last 3 games and build a big lead only to blow it. But this time, without Domantas Sabonis, the Kings were down somewhat big early to the Nuggets. They made significant halftime adjustments and actually had a chance to win this game. It turned out to be a very, very fun game. We'll talk about that after I tell you about Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And that's the point that I try to hit home to everybody. Just because you're eating healthy doesn't mean that you have to give up the sweets that you love. Look, we all have a sweet tooth. We all would much rather prefer to eat a delicious chocolate bar or candy bar instead of something that doesn't taste as good, that may be better for my body. We're all human. We all have those tendencies. We all have that sweet tooth. Built Bar doesn't expect you to get rid of that. In fact, it embraces that. Built Bar can handle that sweet tooth of yours, can fulfill that side of your taste buds while also being overall better for you. Most Built Bars are 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar. It's on average 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs. It's way better across the board. And it comes in a bunch of different flavors for you to try, so you won't get bored with them. You can order a mixed box right now on built.com to try out a bunch of those flavors if you haven't already. If you know what flavors you like, then you can go and order your specific box and pick out the bars and how many bars that you want in your box, regardless of what you order on built.com. Make sure you use our promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Well, if you're a draft lottery odds fan and are watching the Sacramento Kings for the purpose of seeing this team lose to increase those draft lottery odds, very similar to the Dallas Mavericks loss a couple of games ago, you got close to, if not your best case scenario. A highly entertaining game. The Kings played very, very well, I thought. A lot of players stepping up in different ways with Domantas Sabonis being out, and the Kings giving a playoff team in the Denver Nuggets with the reigning MVP a lot to handle. Now, not too much that they couldn't handle it, but this game ended up coming down to the wire, and the Kings did have their fair chances to actually win this game. In fact, momentum was so heavily on the Kings' side with a slight lead with like 4 minutes remaining, 3 minutes remaining, that I thought the Kings were actually going to be able to pull it off. But the Nuggets, they know how to close this game out. The Kings missing Sabonis. That's tough for this team to overcome, of course, and they end up losing 106-100. But, I mean, there's really nothing about this game that I can be mad at other than the fact that Sabonis didn't play because of the hypocrisy of the league, which we already talked about. But it was a fun game, a very fun game, and what I enjoyed the most out of this game was how the team responded in the second half. This Kings team just proved to us all that they are capable of making halftime defensive adjustments that work. Now, the issue recently has been how the Kings handle adjustments by other teams, and scripts kind of flipped this time. Instead of the Kings being up big in the first half, they were down by double digits, and then the second half, they ended up coming back, building a slight lead, mainly starting on the defensive end, and then they got excellent performances from a big name like De'Aaron Fox, who once again has continued his stretch of, it's now 14 straight games where he scored 20 or more points. In this game, he crossed the 30-point threshold. And of course, Nikola Jokic had the amazing game that he had, but De'Aaron Fox really came alive in that second half, especially in the fourth quarter, attacking the basket. His 3-point shot, I thought, looked as good as it has looked at any point this season. He was shooting it with confidence. It was fluid. Fox just has rediscovered his ability to, and we talked about this recently, his ability to cruise to 20, and when he needs to turn on the gas to get to 30 or more, he's capable of doing that. He finished with 32 points on 12 of 23 shooting, so over 50%, 4 of 6 from three-point range. You absolutely love to see that, and a perfect 4 of 4 from the free throw line. Now, Fox should be getting to the line more than 4 times, and of course, there was officiating drama in this game, as there always seems to be in every Kings game. I thought the officiating was poor, honestly, on both sides, so I'm not blaming the officiating at all for the Kings losing this game. But De'Aaron Fox should be going to the line more than 4 times. He also had 10 assists. So anytime you can get a double-double with multiple or double-digit assists from De'Aaron Fox, that's a win in itself. I have no complaints about the game of De'Aaron Fox in this one. I do have a small complaint, though, about the play of Harrison Barnes, because he finished with 17 points, which is the second leading scorer on the Kings, and ended up with 11 field goals attempted. He went 5 of 11 from the field, 3 of 7 from three-point range, 4 of 6 from the free throw line. And funny enough, the 2 free throws that he missed were both technical free throws. Not that it ended up mattering that much. But before the fourth quarter, I'm pretty sure Harrison Barnes had 7 field goal attempts. When you are missing your either best or second best player, depending upon how you want to look at it, in Domantas Sabonis, arguably an extremely important player, especially on the offensive end of the floor, someone else needs to step up and try and fill that scoring gap that Sabonis is leaving behind. And I would expect the next guy other than De'Aaron Fox to be Harrison Barnes in that scenario. Fox did his part, took 23 shots, scored 32 points. And even though HB finished with 17, he could have had over 20, and the Kings needed over 20 to have a chance to win this game. I need Harrison Barnes to be more aggressive in general, but especially in games like this where the Kings are missing such an important scorer in Domantas Sabonis, you need way more out of Harrison Barnes. And he has had a tendency at times this season to disappear and not shoot that many shots. And actually, he's had games where he scored over 20 points and taken less than 10 field goals. A lot of it is because of his ability to get to the foul line. That's not good enough. You need more aggressiveness. Now, what I appreciate about the way Harrison Barnes plays is he doesn't force a lot. And I'm not saying that it would be better for the Kings for Harrison to have 15 or 16 field goal attempts a game when he's forcing 5 or 6 of them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying Harrison is capable of looking for his shot and getting better looks at a higher rate than what he's been showing us, especially in this game here tonight, but in a handful of games so far this season. And needed more out of Harrison Barnes there. Trey Lyles, even though I kind of spoke against him being in the starting lineup, I thought he played pretty well. Finished with 14 points, 9 rebounds. Most of that scoring came in the first half, went 6 of 12 from the field. The Kings got 8 points from Justin Holiday. It was another rough shooting performance for Holiday, 3 of 8 from the field. Not terrible, but 1 of 4 from three-point range. And I know fans are getting a little bit impatient with his poor perimeter shooting, but Justin Holiday played really, really well defensively. I think at the end of the third quarter, he had a pair of blocks, and then Donte DiVincenzo, who unfortunately didn't score for the Kings off the bench, went 0 of 5 from the field. He had a nice block at the end of the game as well. DiVincenzo playing only 11 and a half minutes. So again, maybe not the best time to make an argument that DiVincenzo should be considered in the starting lineup for the Sacramento Kings. But I still think, knowing DiVincenzo's, not just his chances, the expectation that DiVincenzo is going to be around. Look, the Kings don't trade for Donte DiVincenzo, who's going to be a restricted free agent this offseason. They don't trade for him without the expectation that they're going to be bringing him back. And we know Monty McNair's wanted him for a while. Donte DiVincenzo is going to be a part of this Kings team going forward, more likely than guys like Trey Lyles and Justin Holiday. So that's my argument for him playing, even if he didn't have the best game. Chimezie Metu was really solid off the bench with 9 points. Damian Jones was fantastic defensively. The Kings actually started Alex Len, and the majority of the points that Jokic scored, he had another triple-double, 38 points, 18 rebounds. I'm sorry, just a double-double. 38 points, 18 rebounds, and 7 assists. The majority of the success that Jokic had was against Alex Len. I thought Damian Jones defensively, for being as undersized as he is in 37 and a half minutes, played fantastic defense and really at times frustrated Jokic. Love to see what Damian Jones provided. Really hope that he's a King next season, because I think he can and maybe even will earn a spot in the rotation. And then Davion Mitchell, 8 points on 3 of 6 shooting, 2 of 5 from three-point range. Only played just under 21 minutes. Again, at this point in the season, Davion Mitchell needs to be playing 25 minimum, but I would not hate to see him playing upwards of 30, especially in a game where Domantas Sabonis is not playing. So overall, there's few things for me really to be mad at about this game. The Kings defensively played really well, forced 20 Nuggets turnovers and scored 23 points off of those Nuggets turnovers. Love to see that. In the end, I recognize how this helps the Kings in their draft lottery situation, but I also recognize that it was a fun game, that there were things to build upon, things to take away positively from this game. And for me, even if the Kings don't make the play-in, that is certainly something to celebrate. Bringing up Tankathon really quick to get an idea of where the Kings are at in their lottery standings now. They've moved half a game closer to the Indiana Pacers, who are holding on to that 5th pick slot. The Kings are a game and a half back of the Pacers in that 6th spot, a full 2 games ahead of San Antonio in the 7th spot, and the Kings are 3 games behind the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the best odds for the 4th spot. So that's your Tankathon update for all you draft lottery odds lovers out there. But now I want to hear from you. Your thoughts on what I had to say about Alvin Gentry, your thoughts on this game as a whole for the Sacramento Kings, your thoughts on the Domantas Sabonis suspension. Let me know what you're feeling at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Appreciate your support as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next Locked On Kings podcast. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.